Good day, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I'd like to thank the organizers and the volunteers and all the participants. The topic is about recovery. I'm very passionate about it, and we have a lot to cover. What I'm hoping to cover is I really would like to give you a perspective of where the recovery movement has come from. I'd like to be able to give you some definitions, and there are many definitions. I'd like to talk about how recovery is an individual process. And then I'm going to switch and talk a little bit about our policies, both in Canada and in Quebec. The biggest challenge that we face is how recovery is being implemented into services. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. I'm going to end with a bit of an overview of what current research and some of the initiatives that we are doing in the Quebec context. And I'm hoping that each person will leave with a better understanding of recovery and maybe some ideas on how we can begin to implement it into services. The first thing I'd like to say is recovery is happening everywhere. It really is a new paradigm shift. And when I say paradigm shift, I mean it's a new model, a new way of looking at mental health. Recovery is happening in Great Britain, in New Zealand, Australia, United States, and in Canada. So maybe the first myth is when people say we've brought recovery from the United States. That's not true. Recovery is really something that is happening worldwide. So what is it? Where does it come from? What are the origins of recovery? The first origin of recovery are all of the studies that have been conducted over the last 25 to 30 years. We call these studies outcome studies. And these are studies that involved large numbers of people who had serious mental illness, and we followed these people for 20 to 35 years. And what did we find out? We found out that people do recover. And when we talk about this kind of recovery, this is clinical recovery. So the studies consistently showed that people who come from Switzerland, Germany, Iowa, Vermont, Japan, Maine, there is 2/3 approximately of the people that we have followed who have either recovered completely or improved significantly. Now just think about that. These are studies that are rigorous. They followed large numbers of people, between 140 and over 500 people. And they found out that people do recover. So here's another myth. People do recover. And when we talk about this kind of recovery, this is a clinical recovery. And I'd like you to think about this as I go through and talk about other origins of recovery. So the evidence is there. People do recover. If we look at some of the other origins of the recovery movement, there's something that we call the mental health consumer survivor movement. What was this? These were people who have lived experience, who began organizing and publishing their experience with mental health, with the mental health system, and their own recovery experiences. These people like Patricia Deegan, people like Dan Fisher, these are the consumer survivor heroes who began advocating for recovery. And their writings speak about hope, acceptance, engagement, being connected or reconnected, determination, shared decision-making, and supportive relationships. So now we've got a group of people who are organizing and saying, we want to publish our experience about recovery. And then we've got all of those studies that I've mentioned that tell us that people do recover from a clinical sense. Another origin of recovery in mental health is, at some point, people who were working in mental health said, we think there's a lot of similarity between what goes on in the addictions community, where people have been speaking about recovery for over 25 years, the 12-step program, being in recovery. So people in mental health said, we need to borrow some of that momentum, because mental illness is a long-term illness for many people. But like addiction, the person really has the right to reclaim his or her life. So we've got three origins. There's a fourth, and that is that over the last 15 to 20 years, we have developed new treatment and new approaches in psychosocial rehabilitation. Some of you might have heard of best practices, evidence-based research. There are new treatments that have been introduced, things like community assertive treatment, ACT or PACT, supported employment, individual placement and support, supported housing, illness management, family psychosocial education. These are all concrete new practices that are available, that have contributed to the recovery movement. And last but not least, because I haven't presented these in any order, are advances in medication. I was, over 30 years ago, a student here. I was a social work student, and I did a placement in the Northwest Pavilion, which is now the Newman Pavilion. And I saw how people were so affected by the medications that we were giving them. 30 years later, we have advanced significantly in medication. And this is enabling people who have psychiatric disabilities to become stable, to look at the possibility of self-management of symptoms. But this is a very important aspect of the recovery movement. So, you've got the origins, and now you're probably asking, well, what is recovery? What does recovery mean? There are many different definitions. Let me stress that. There are many definitions. And part of the work that we're doing is trying to better understand what recovery means. For some, recovery means being cured. And that's an illness model, an acute illness model. People define recovery as overcoming the illness. The same thing as having the flu. You get sick, and then you recover. There are other people who speak about recovery as improving to the point of no longer having any visible signs of the illness. We all know people who suffer from diabetes, heart problems. This is asthma. For some, recovery is about improving to the point of no longer having any visible signs. The third definition, and this is really the focus of my message tonight, defines recovery as getting one's life back. Getting one's life back despite the continuing disability. When I was asked to make this presentation, I thought it would be important to get the perspective of some people who have lived experience. And so I'd like to share with you one person's definition of her journey of recovery.
Recovery for me would mean having a full-time job, living independently, being able to sort of direct my life the way I wanted to direct it, making a good group of friends, having a network of support around me, being the person I used to be, but also with that additional understanding of myself. Being sick actually kind of really makes you think about yourself and what you like, what you don't like. It like kind of forces you to examine your role in society, how you function in society. And so I've discovered a lot about myself and what I like and don't like, and I think it's been beneficial overall. As you recover, it really helps you to get the support you need and to find your place, your proper place. That's not going to cause you stress or mental distress in any way, and basically allow you to be mentally healthy. Because mental health, I think, is very important for everybody, not just for people who have experienced an illness.
So that's Janina's definition of recovery. We talk about recovery from mental illness, and we talk about recovery in mental illness. That's a very important distinction for you to think about. Recovery from is about eradicating the illness, finding a cure. Recovery in mental illness is about learning how to live a dignified, full, and self-determined life in the community. Recovery in mental illness is what we need to embrace. I had the opportunity to meet with another person with lived experience, and Danielle illustrates the struggle between recovery in versus recovery from. And I'd like to share that with you.
Well, recovery is, for me, it's a word that has a lot of meanings, but for me, my personal experience, like recovery is something really positive, and it has many steps, but hope is one of the keys to be recovered like properly and to finally to finally be in a state of mind, in a state in having a comfortable life that you're living in being satisfied. If you want to recover, you're going to have to think about people around you, surrounding you. It could be a professional. You're going to need a lot of help from the professional. And to have the help that you need, you're going to have to open somehow, share, and get something from them, and they get something from you too. And it's like a teamwork. Like me, for example, during my days, my bad days, and I had to really try hard to open as much as possible to be able to receive too.
These are our heroes. These are our recovery heroes. So if we think about a definition, we need to acknowledge that recovery is a way of acknowledging that people can successfully contend with their mental illness and still create positive lives. And still create positive lives. We know that recovery is really grounded in resiliency, that there are key internal processes that enable individuals to surmount crises and stresses, and that innate strength, that capacity and hardiness of that individual is central to recovery. Both of our testimonies speak about hope. Hope is central to recovery. We all have hope. We all need to have hope. The feeling that something that one desires is possible. There was a senatorial report that defined recovery in 2006. I'd like to share that with you. Recovery is not the same thing as being cured. For many individuals, it is a way of living a satisfying, hopeful, and productive life, even with limitations caused by the illness. For others, recovery means the reduction or complete remission of symptoms related to mental illness. So I've given you a couple of definitions to think about. It's important to recognize that recovery is an individual process. Recovery happens with each individual. It is a different process. So we need to maybe understand what are some of these elements. People who speak about recovery speak about belonging and acceptance from others. They speak about renewed hope, commitment, involvement in meaningful activities. How many times have I spoken to people who have said to me, I wish I had something to do. I have nothing to do with my life. People who are in the recovery process want to do meaningful activities. Managing symptoms is part of the recovery process. Experiencing successes and pleasures. People who are in recovery want to experience success, pleasures. They also are entitled to experience failure, just like you and I. The notion of giving back is central to people in recovery. They want to be able to give back to others. They want to regain their citizenship in the broader community. I think that the most important message about the definition of recovery is that being in recovery means that the illness is only one aspect of the person. So rather than having one's life defined as being schizophrenic or being bipolar, it really is only one aspect. Very different from how we have treated people.